You're listening to Level Up with Melissa Zeloof from Iron Source.
So welcome back, everyone. You're listening to Level Up, the podcast for people who love making, growing, and of course, playing mobile games. I'm your host, Melissa Zeloof, and this is the first episode of our new series for indie developers called What I Wish I Knew When. Now, joining me on today's podcast is Gabriel. Oh, Gabriel, I never asked you how to pronounce your surname.
So it's Coriiu.
Coriiu. Okay, so how
Yeah.
it's spelled?
It's
So
Coriiu.
You, exactly. So it does what it says on the tin. So Gabriel Coriiu, originally from Romania, but currently located in Helsinki. Gabriel's the co-founder of Seenax and the developer behind the hit game Hide and Seek. We'll be talking about what he wished he knew when choosing a publisher and about his journey to getting a hyper-casual game to number 1 and number 5 on Android and iOS, respectively. So Gabriel, thanks so much for being on the show with us today.
Hi, Melissa. Yeah, thank you for having me.
So first, to start, could you maybe tell us a little bit about your personal journey in the gaming industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always been passionate about visual arts and programming and video games for as long as I remember myself, basically. And after graduating high school, I was faced with the tough decision of picking between arts and IT as a career. And in the end, I ended up picking the IT career, but still continue to develop my artistic skills on the side by being more and more active on visual art forums. And I even remember that some of my works got featured on evermotion.org, which is a pretty well-known forum in that area. And in my third year of studying computer science, I remember that someone from GameLoft sent me a private message asking if I was interested into getting hired as an environment artist while still studying computer science. Yeah, exactly. It was like a dream come true. And later on, I transitioned into a technical artist and finally managing to mix programming with art. And later on, I relocated to Helsinki. So yeah, that's how I got into the industry.
And what was your journey to sort of founding Seenax, and why did you sort of choose hyper casual? Was there something in particular about the genre that drew you to develop games for it?
Well, I have to say that right away there was nothing special to the hyper casual genre. And I remember that I even kind of disliked it at first because, gamers have this perception of the hyper casual games being cheap because they have quite a bit of ads into them. But I gradually started to enjoy making them. And now I see them as this kind of personal projects that I like experiments that I work on for 1 or 2 weeks and then I test them. And I also try to add some technical challenges when possible. So, for instance, with Boopy, it was the jelly behavior, and with Spray, it was like the shaders and the VFX of the spray to behave in a realistic manner. And with Hide and Seek, it was the AI and handling the vision of the field vision of the seeker, And now to answer your question, the reason I ended up picking hyper casual games was due to the good risk reward ratio, especially for solo developers.
Of course. And when your first attempt actually at building a game, which was Boopy, if I'm right, didn't end up quite the way you hoped it would. Tell us a little bit of the story there. What went wrong? What were your main takeaways?
Oh boy, yeah. So Boopy, the first big mistake that I made with Boopy, I think it was putting way too much energy into making it a finished product. So there was no way in my mind that could have failed. And when it did, I was devastated and I just didn't want to accept it as a failure. And then what I did after that, I started testing it with multiple publishers because I thought at first that there was an issue with the first publisher, and then they just got pretty much more or less the same results. And I even remember like a funny story that after testing it with the first publisher, after seeing the KPIs, what I did, I went to each analytics platform like Game Analytics, Unity Analytics, and Facebook, and got the best KPIs from that. So, for instance, I got the day one from Game Analytics, the day seven from Unity, and playtime from Facebook or something like that. And I put all of them into a big image and sent it to the publisher saying, hey, look, the game didn't perform as badly as it did. But eventually I just had to accept it as a failure. Now, another mistake, and this is, by the way, this is a confirmation bias at its best. So that was a really big mistake, basically making decisions based on personal beliefs as opposed to actual data. So meaning, analyzing the hits, finding what most of the hits have in common. For instance, short call loops, clear 3D style, flat and minimalist art style, and so on.
So after this experience, building and failing with Boopy, you were looking obviously for the right publisher to partner with for longer term projects. What were you in this kind of initial stage, or at that time, what exactly were you looking for in a publisher?
Yeah, well, I was looking for, I think that what everyone is looking for even now, like fair terms, transparency, and mutual respect. And I remember back then there were not many options. And let's consider this situation. I come to you with the winning solution for the lottery, right? Like the winning numbers, but I just can't afford to get a ticket. And then because you afford to get a ticket, you would just not split the revenue fairly, right? And I don't think that's a good way of handling developers.
And how, sort of, now that you've a bit more experience under your belt, what do you know about choosing the right publisher that you wish you had known earlier on?
Well, basically, I think all of the above still stands, but I wouldn't. I don't think I know more than I did then. I just wish there were more options overall.
And do you feel you had a learning curve after partnering with your current publisher, Supersonic, or the publisher of Hide and Seek? And if so, what were some of the things you learned that you think were important?
Well, I don't think there was too steep of a learning curve. We just learned together gradually by trial and error, and uh, most of the most important takeaways would be that the thing that people love power ups. So I remember that after adding the teleport gates into the game, the engagement increased, and so the retention and then also the invisibility reward video, which also is sort of a power up. It's actually a power up on its own, and having no loading screen in between levels, that also helped a lot because initially there was a small duration in between levels because you'd have to load the next level, but now I skipped that. I fixed it. And then, last but not least, to put clarity over beauty. I think these are pretty much the most important. I would also like to thank Supersonic for all the effort they put in.
Clarity over beauty. That's nice. And looking more widely, you talked about wishing that publishers, you said fair terms, transparency, and mutual respect. Are there parts beyond those kind of three key elements? Are there parts of the publishing world that you wish were different, or that you think need improvement today?
Well, it's hard to be specific, but because each publisher acts in a different way, like they all have different terms and workflows. But I just wish generally, not only for publishers, but for all the people to understand the purpose of a currency, that being money, and realize that immaterial values are more important because at the end of the day, we are together on this beautiful spaceship. So we should help and respect one another.
And what do you think about choosing whether or not to go for a publisher in the first place? Do you think it's a must for developers today because UA competition is so fierce, or is there value to going it alone and publishing solo?
Well, uh, unless the studio doesn't have the resources and knowledge to promote the game, I say there is no other option. So with a studio for making a hyper casual games, the minimum would be uh, to have a gameplay programmer, an artist, having someone to make videos. So there'll be creatives and someone to handle UA, and then you'd have some backend developers to implement some A/B testing tools, and you also need to make sure that the people that you work with are skilled, right? So for instance, now if I want to go on my own, how am I going to pick a good a UA guy, right? Because I don't know much about UA. So that's also kind of a problem. So on average, I would say that uh, at the beginning, it's a wise decision to go with a publisher.
Mm-hmm. And now let's talk a little bit about hide and seek, which was a huge hit. Where did the concept for the game come from?
So yeah, the concept. Well, the concept has always been in my mind. You know, it's nothing new. We used to play that when we were kids a lot, right? But I just didn't know how to properly represent that virtually on a mobile device. But one day, I just watched a video on the channel on YouTube called 2 Minutes Paper, which is a channel about AI in general, and the it was a video about how the AI basically learned from scratch to play hide and seek uh, using neural networks, and the representation of the game was pretty much identical to what it is like in hide and seek. So that's how I got the idea from. And as soon as I saw that, I just snapped, and I just uh, starting working on it.
Nice. And the game actually had low CPIs from the start. So for you, the main thing to focus on was retention. What changes did you make to the game to boost playtime, retention, and in the end, what impact did you see these have on your KPIs?
Yeah, so the most notable are some of them were already mentioned before, but downscale. I downscaled the levels quite a lot, so I made them way smaller, and I also simplified the levels from real-world representations to this abstract labyrinth style. Removed loading screen from in between levels, and then spawned the next level in front of it and smoothly transition the camera from one level to another so that I can uh, give more seamless to the game. And then I added the shop and the invisibility power up. And after those, the retention increased, I think, by 50% and playtime by around 30%, which is
Wow.
quite nice.
Yeah, not bad.
Yeah, not bad at all.
So let's talk a little bit about the growth loop, which is something we talk about quite a lot here on LevelUp. And at least we think it's the key to scaling profitable and sustainable game business. What was the process like for you when it came to looking at your ad unit or ad monetization and user acquisition strategy holistically? Was this something you were already doing, or was it something that you sort of started thinking about once you connected with Supersonic?
No. I've never specialized in, and I've never even tried doing monetization. So I've always relied on the publishers to handle the monetization side. How to put the RFVs and the ads and when to trigger them. So on that note, yeah, I kind of relied on Supersonic. But in terms of implementing them, it was kind of straightforward because of the Iron Source SDK that's really well documented. That helps a lot. And also Supersonic has really good tech support. Now, in terms of user acquisition, I wasn't involved that much straight away. I just provided the best performing videos from the testing phase, but later I got more and more involved and made some playables using Luna, which is a great tool for Unity. And shout out to the Luna team, which helped a lot in that regard.
Mm-hmm. And how did you see these two elements as being connected, your ad monetization and your user acquisition? Meaning they see ad monetization as being one discrete activity with a specific team, and user acquisition a different team with different goals, etc. Whereas what we're seeing is more and more developers are looking at these two elements as part of one big unified growth strategy. So it's not just about bringing in lots of users, it's about measuring their value in terms of both ad monetization and, if you have it, IAP, and feeding that data back into the user acquisition strategy to make sure that you're optimizing the entire loop and not just one side and then the other separately.
Yeah, well, now take this with a grain of salt because I'm not specialized in UA and monetization, and I'm still learning a lot in that area. But to me, I still treat them as two different areas.
Right, got it. And last question. What advice would you give to fellow game developers about getting started in the industry and building successful games?
Well, most importantly, stay safe in this period,
Yeah,
and
totally.
pick your partners wisely. I think those are the most important things you have to
And so
consider.
then what's my follow up? How do you know what makes a good partner? I guess.
Well, like I said, fair terms and transparency and mutual respect, and maybe that reflected straight away when you work with a publisher because you are just presented the interface, like the cover of a book. But as soon as you get the contract, and if you read it carefully, you just get a sense of how uh, how respectful they are towards the developers, I think.
Mm, mm. Nice. Well, thank you very much, Gabriel, for this wonderful episode, and thank you everyone else, as always, for listening.
Thank you. Bye.